AI agents now interact with digital interfaces alongside humans. Designing for both requires rethinking what user means and prioritizing accessibility. I'm not sure. I'm still very scared about letting an agent interact with my finances and like making decisions for me online. I wouldn't let an agent get access to my emails, for example. So for me, the use case for having agents interact with like digital interfaces is kind of a weird thing. Do you need an interface? Couldn't you just open up an API and have the agent sort of interact through code? Well, why does it need an interface? But let's see what they have to say. The design community has spent decades refining what it means to design for users. We study their behavior, map their journeys, test our assumptions against their needs. Our discipline is and should be oriented around understanding who is using the product or service and designing accordingly. AI agents, systems that pursue a goal by iteratively taking actions, evaluating progress, and deciding on its own steps, are now interacting with the same digital interfaces we design for people. They navigate websites, fill out forms, compare options, execute transactions. They do this crudely, often unreliably, and with significant limitations. In functional terms, they are users of our interfaces, even if we haven't recognized them as such. Okay, yeah, but still, it's so risky. Should we recognize them if they don't do it reliably? Maybe we should start having like disclaimers on all of our websites where it says like, if you're using this as an agent, or if you're letting an agent use this website, you are putting yourself in harm's way, and you should be aware of that. We take no responsibility. For me, that seems like a much more right now feasible way to tackle this problem, rather than designing the interface to facilitate the robots. I'm unsure that I see the value of that. There's a conceptual shift required to account for this reality. A core assumption needs updating. User is no longer synonymous with human. I don't agree. I think users are humans. Humans can use an algorithm or a statistical model to achieve things, but in the end, aren't we serving the users that are connected to that agent? I'm not sure that I agree with this article so far. For most of history, most of the history of digital design, the word user has implicitly meant human being sitting in front of a screen. Most design heuristics, usability principles, and research methods assume a human on the other end. People are having agents attempt a nearly infinite variety of tasks, combining calendars and adding new events, booking flights, checking if a prescription has been refilled, finding the best reviewed product under a certain price. The agent interacts with digital interfaces to find information, understand available actions, and execute them, just as a human would. While it may feel antithetical to the philosophy of user experience, this reality means the agent is a user in every functional sense. Or are we just anthropomorphizing here? The digital system, if we wanted to book a flight, we should probably see the user still being the person prompting, and the digital agent, as it were, as a part of the digital chain. I think another word would be better. I don't think necessarily it would be beneficial for anyone to shift the word user to also include agents. But let's see what they have to say. It has a goal. It encounters an interface. It attempts to accomplish the goal through that interface, and the interface either supports that attempt or it doesn't. Well, yes, but is that the best way? Like, do we want digital agents to go through the interface? Couldn't it just look through a database of relevant things and send, I don't know, SQL commands? I'm not sure. Is having a digital interface, clicking a button, desirable? It seems a bit dubious to me. The distinction matters because the interfaces we design today are already failing this new type of user, and those agents are in turn failing the human being on the other side of the screen, which is kind of fine because the users of those agents, and I want to use the term user for the human, the users of the agent are sort of first in line. They are the early adopters of this technology. I understand how I would use an agent to do things online, but I don't want to because I don't trust the technology and I'm not willing to put my finances and my information, well, as protected as that can be, but I'm not willing to put that out there in that way. I don't think that's a good idea. I really don't think that's a good idea. So yeah, early adopters always, as it says, early, and they are most of the time willing to try things out even if it breaks. And that should ideally lead to the agents becoming better at solving tasks, or us users and people trying to serve us coming up with ways to use agents that doesn't break. I'm not necessarily sure that it's feasible to just change the internet to also facilitate agents. The agents probably have to get better in order for that to be a sort of feasible thing to do. There are three primary approaches agents use to interact with digital interfaces. This is actually interesting to me because I want to know what other ways there are than the one they stated earlier, which is just clicking a button on the screen. And each one reveals a different set of design assumptions that break down. Vision-based interaction. The most rudimentary approach mirrors what humans do. The agent takes a screenshot of the interface and uses a vision model to interpret what it sees. The agent looks at the page, identifies elements, button, text fields, navigation items, decides what to click and repeats. And this seems like a very fragile way to do it. I'm sure this is absolutely the worst way to try to achieve things online. Using a robot to click buttons seems really bad. This approach is expensive. It's slow, computationally wasteful, error-prone, and token-intensive. A single screenshot requires tens of thousands of tokens for the model to process and doesn't account for dynamic content or multi-step workflows. And that's fair. Like, if you, for example, want to highlight a button that it's, okay, so here's an action that you can take, and we know that because we move the mouse to highlight the button, that would be at least 2 screenshots for the AI to understand that. And that's not good if it costs a lot of money. Say that it costs a couple of dollars per image, then that's not really an economical way to click a button, is it? Accessibility tree parsing. Rather than screenshotting the page, agents can also read the browser's accessibility tree, the structured representation of the page that browsers generate from HTML. This is the same data structure that screen readers use to make interfaces navigable for people with visual impairments. The accessibility tree provides a clean hierarchical representation of page elements, the roles, labels, states, and relationships. It costs a few thousand tokens to process, a fraction of what screenshots require, and provides more reliable information. That makes sense. That actually seems like a much better way. And as annoying as a screen reader interface is for someone with good vision, it's really useful with someone with impaired vision, but I can also see that, yeah, it's really easy and structured to go through that. And given the amount of time that companies have spent on sort of making accessibility better the last couple of years, just because of legislation and things, this is likely a much better way to do it. Interfaces that are well built for accessibility are already more legible to agents. Semantic HTML, properly labeled elements, clear roles, and logical page hierarchy also serves the agent user. And then we have what I probably spoke about earlier, direct API access. The third approach bypasses the interface entirely with agent-to-agent interactions and agent-to-API interactions. While structured APIs are available, agents can query data and execute actions directly without having to interact with any visual or structural representation of a page. Emerging standards like the Model Context Protocol are making the approach more standardized, but not necessarily more widespread. Okay, I mean, this is interesting just because I don't think necessarily we want to use agents anyhow, the way that agents are today, which is basically just an LLM with a more or less thin wrapper around it. Because it's a statistical thing, given enough users, it will break horribly a number of times. Maybe not a lot of the times, but if you have a significant user base enough, it's going to be catastrophic enough in enough times that it's going to be really, really bad. So I still think that we need to sort of figure out something that is better than just an LLM with a wrapper. And I'm assuming also that the quality of agents can be very different and that you can use a lot of other technologies to sort of rein it in and maybe even initiate an action through an LLM by writing in text, but then if it's specialized enough, you could have just an algorithm that is more suitable for the task and just book a flight through a decision tree or something. Consider a mundane example. A parent asks their agent to check the school website for upcoming events, cross-reference those dates against the family's shared calendar, and flag any conflicts. A human would scan the events page, note the dates, and check the calendar. The agent's experience is different. The school website was designed for a parent to scan visually. Events are listed with dates, times, and descriptions arranged through spatial grouping. A human may not struggle to read this, but for an agent parsing a screenshot, every piece of information must be inferred from pixel clusters. Which text is a date, which is a title, and how do they relate? The event page may load dynamically, capturing an incomplete page. Some events live on the website, others are downloadable PDFs, others behind parent portal logins. Every step increases the likelihood of error, as well as token use. Completing something this ordinary and mundane becomes a large task, let alone agents completing more complex tasks, making changes to a profile, ordering an item, or checking availability and booking. Yeah, and that's a good point. If you have something that is low complexity and low stakes, which is checking a calendar to see how it fits into your time, and the worst thing that can happen is you miss a recital or something, that can be bad enough, but it's not financially crippling. It's not gonna affect your health, for example. But yeah, then low stakes and low complexity, maybe we're coming to a point where I can dare try to use it like that. Near term, designing for both. In the immediate term, the design question is, how do we build interfaces that serve both human users and agent users simultaneously? This is context dependent and assumes the delegation of tasks by your users that they align with your products or services ethos. Okay, so we basically, if we want agents to be able to take over, then we should do this. Otherwise, we shouldn't. Accessibility guidelines achieve this design goal. Clear descriptive elements, names, predictable interaction patterns, logical page hierarchy, semantic HTML, ARIA standards. These are accessibility fundamentals that the design community has understood, albeit often deprioritized for years. Investing in accessibility has been the right thing to do, but now there's a clear business case for it. And it's how agents will use products and services in the near term. Organizations that have been rigorous about accessibility have, perhaps without realizing it, been building interfaces that agents can already navigate more effectively. This is a great argument if you're a UX designer or developer and you want to spend some money and time on building more accessible web pages and systems, I mean, this will probably, now is the time to do that. If you have something like this and you want to make sure that your management team is on this, this article is not bad as an argument for doing that. Clear descriptive labeling. Avoid icon-only buttons, ambiguous text links, link texts like click here, and labels that are dependent on visual context. Predictable, consistent patterns. Consistent navigation structures, standard form patterns, and predictable state changes reduce the likelihood of agent errors compounding across multi-step workflows. Minimal reliance on visual-only information architecture. Structural markup must reflect the visual grouping in order for agents to understand relationships. None of these recommendations are new. They're the same principles that make interfaces more usable for humans with disabilities, more robust across devices and contexts, and more maintainable over time. What if you don't want agents in your product? This is interesting because you probably not, you don't always want that. I can see also if it's about democracy, for example, you want participation from the public, you need to actively work against that. There are certainly business models and product categories where having an agent in your product may be undesirable. I mean, ads. If you want people to look at ads, you don't care about agents looking at ads. You want people to do that. And in that case, you have to work against agents accessing something that has an ad. If you have information on your page that is useful for someone, you want that person to come to your page. And that's, yeah, I mean, it's a big problem, obviously, right now, but from this perspective, it's an interesting thought. The argument for designing with agents is in mind assumes that your user's goal and your business goals stay aligned when a machine acts on the user's behalf. That's not always true. When the visit is the product, some businesses depend on humans actually visiting the product. For example, for these companies, an agent that extracts the value without the visit is an existential problem. Ad-supported content and content marketing sites have already begun to see the impacts of this shift in their metrics. Yeah, it's a big problem. The internet, as we know it, is kind of at risk here. Streaming services have a version of this problem too. Netflix wants you to browse. Browse time surfaces original content and deepens the engagement loop that drives the retention. An agent that answers, "What should I watch tonight?" without the user ever opening the app undermines the discovery experience Netflix has been optimizing for years. When friction is intentional. Not all friction in an interface is a design failure. In some domains, the friction exists for regulatory, legal, or safety reasons, and removing it creates liability. Financial services are full of examples. A brokerage that makes it easy for an agent to execute trades without safety checkpoints and legal disclosures open itself for regulatory risk. The friction is necessary. Healthcare products will face similar challenges. HIPAA, healthcare is a good example. Finance and healthcare and law are all places where you don't want people to not understand. You could argue that people are already sort of skimming through EULAs and just clicking buttons to achieve a goal that they have, but this probably opens up a whole new sort of vector of liability for these companies. Some interfaces are deliberately opaque to machines because the data behind them is competitively sensitive. Airlines, hotels, and rental car companies have spent years fighting the screen scraping bots. Their pricing is dynamic, proprietary, and strategically managed. Real-time access to that data is exactly what competitors and price comparison aggregators want. Making interfaces agent-friendly would undo all of that. Yeah, so you don't want that. When you want your product to be the agent, there are plenty of platforms that want to be the agent layer themselves. Some products are actively restricting third-party agent access, blocking external MCP calls, limiting API surface area. Thank you so much for looking at this video. If you've come this far, if you could consider subscribing or writing a comment, that would really help me. I love interacting with you guys and I'm learning so much from that. So if you have a second or two, just give it a like and I will see you next time.